everyone. Today, we are joined by Scott Roberts, who is the founder and publisher of Intrepid Magazine, a journal eclectically focused on science, politics, fringe science, metaphysics, and unexplained phenomena. Scott is a talk radio show host, popular public speaker, and stand-up philosopher. He's the author of The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim, the untold story of fallen angels, giants in the earth, and their extraterrestrial origins, as well as the author and illustrator of The Rollicking Adventures of Tam O'Hare, an historical novel for young adults set in Tudor England, Ireland, and Scotland during the tumultuous reigns of Mary, Queen of Scots, and Elizabeth I. Scott has been interviewed on scores of radio shows and is the former editor-in-chief of TAP's Para magazine, Sci-Fi's Ghost Hunters official publication. He attended Bible college and seminary, but left ministerial pursuits for a 34-year career as an art director, creative director, and accomplished illustrator and designer in advertising. He is currently working on his follow-up book to The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim, entitled The Secret History of the Reptilians, the Pervasive Presence of the Serpent Throughout Human History, Religion, and Alien Mythos. He is also writing and illustrating his new Tam O'Hare novel. He lives with his wife and children just across the border from the outskirts of the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area in rural Wisconsin. And he's presently hosting the Paradigm Symposium, which is going to take place October 18th through 21st with our good friends George Nuri, Laird Scranton, Nick Redfern, and others. He is here today to tell us about this event and why it is that current events feel so strangely influenced by past events. Scott, welcome to Revelations.
Well, William, thanks for having me.
Hey, so you're really doing some incredible work there with Intrepid. It's a beautiful magazine. Well done.
Thank you.
Tell us about the magazine, Scott. When did you start that?
Well, I started the magazine almost a year and a half ago, with our first issue coming out about a year ago. It was a year ago in April. And I had, as you mentioned, I had worked with TAP's Para magazine, and there were many things I had presented to them to say, let's break you guys out of the mold of being a fanzine, and let's move into more stuff that the people would like to read about. And I said, I think you have an untapped audience. And we just never could go there, and by the time I resigned from TAPS, I was ready to launch my own effort. And so that's where Intrepid Magazine came from. And I wanted to appeal to people that are interested in all these topics. And frankly, the magazine is all about the stuff that interests me. So it's kind of my magazine and what I like. And so I have worked very hard to get very good names in here, people either writing and submitting articles, or we interview them, or we write about those topics ourselves. I have recently taken on Micah Hanks of the Gralien Report as a partner in these efforts. And so we're going strong, and we are in our now second year.
Science, politics, fringe science, it's all intertwined, isn't it?
It certainly is. You know, even the politics, if you want to go into pure politics, we had for the magazine, I interviewed Governor Arne Carlson, former governor of Minnesota, to get his take on current politics. Now, we didn't get into anything fringy with him, but what was interesting about politics is we talked to some of these current-day politicians, guys right in the thick of it now, is it starts to segue, if you will, when you start getting into other topics that they don't deal with in government, but you look at things going on behind government. You look at things going on behind the sciences. You look at I hate using the term paranormal, but just for lack of a better label, it's the paranormal. It's outside the stuff of the normal and how it all segues into everything that's supposedly the quote-unquote normal. And so that's what we're looking at with this, is how everything starts to tie together. And there's that danger, of course, of having people perceive you as being weird or odd or so fringy that they don't even want to listen to what you have to say. So we try to temper everything by being as down-to-earth, as grounded as possible, as dealing with as much fact as we can, and then presenting. If you show yourself as being fairly credible and presenting credible information, then you throw incredible information into the mix, it seems to be accepted a little easier at times. So that's our goal.
Scott, it seems like more and more these days, if we want to understand our current world, we've got to understand our ancient origins. Do you agree?
I agree 100%. I find that, let's just take, for example, where I was theologically. I had attended Bible college and seminary. And, of course, the focus of the ministries I was in was dealing with people and day-to-day life and counseling and things like that. But when it got into the theological mix, I started to find, and this is why I kind of drifted away from that organized, very fundamental, conservative denomination that I was in. I drifted away from that because I found the more I looked into theology and compared it to ancient theologies, I said, look, this is just our version of theological or spiritual events or religious dogma, if you will, placed on top of events that are ancient events that seem to be talked about in every different culture, every different religion. And I started to see all these circles that used to be so far apart from each other all starting to merge at the edges. And so it made me take a step back. I had to step outside the box and look back in and say, this all, if you go to your ancient past, you're finding that everybody's telling the same story.
And do you find, Scott, that some of the ancient beings, ancient influences are with us today?
You know, I am. I am one of those guys that will listen to people who have the experiences, that will listen to the metaphysical side, if you will, of these things, the spiritual side of things. I can't deny that those exist at all. I listen to people talk about that. I crave digging into their experiences because I personally haven't had the experience. And maybe some of that is by deliberate action on my part. I tend to separate myself from it and try to examine it from a factual standpoint and then glean other people's experiences and other people's spirituality. So all of this stuff interacting with what's going on today, from everything I hear from credible people that I talk to, I find that, yes, it is happening today. And we're talking in generalities here, but you get down to everything like abduction experiences, metaphysical or psychic experiences of connecting with beings, all the stories and all the even political movements nowadays that are built around the beings that they say exist here already on this planet. It all starts to meld together into the stuff that we find with the factual stuff, if you will, the black and white, the historical study, the anthropological study, the archaeological study. And so, yeah, I believe the stuff that was happening back then, and of course we speculate a bit. When you're not an experiencer, you have to speculate that all of these things have a deeper meaning and that there's a deeper story there. But you're starting to see that all of those things are still happening nowadays. And it seems like it's happening more and more, and we're gleaning deeper and deeper information about it.
Let's focus on the Nephilim, a subject that's near and dear to your heart. You spent a lot of time researching them. The Nephilim, giants, offspring of humans and angels, or some type of extraterrestrial race. Do you agree with that definition?
Well, the beginnings of my studies were things that I learned about when I was really deeply set into my theologies, my biblical theologies. And that was, they talked about the sons of God coming down and interbreeding with the daughters of men and having children with them, called the Nephilim, and the Nephilim being just the offspring. And so for so many years, I took that as a biblical story. You put it in that same category as angels or devils or demons or things from God.
Literal, historical, allegorical, symbolic?
I believe that they are, when you see them in the religious texts, they are allegorical tales, or encoded tales would probably be a better way to put it. I believe that they are true tales, but that there is religious trapping put on top of it by men trying to make sense of it. This is why you have the story of the Nephilim, this story of interbreeding taking place in so many different cultures and religions that literally, if you put them on a theological scale, they're in opposition to each other theologically, but they all tell the same story. Why is that? Because there is a literal story beneath the surface. And even what I found in my studies, even the Old Testament version where I got the source of the word Nephilim comes from, these theological dogmas are just simply the Hebrew version of these stories. When you have the Sumerian version, you have the Hindu version, you have the Mayan version, you have all these different, and that's just to name a couple. There's over 600 different ancient cultures and religions that share these stories.
Wow.
And so when you start digging it out, you say, boy, now that I've stepped out of the box, one thing is for certain. There is a common thread that runs through all of these different religious dogmatic trappings that says something happened to the human race that was very, for lack of a better way to put it, very big in ancient times. So big that everybody talked about it.
So if we accept them as actual historical beings who did come from some other realm, what do you feel they look like, Scott? What's their nature? Are they demonic?
I did a little study in my book on the demonic, simply because I wanted to address the paranormal realm. In the Book of Enoch, the ancient Book of Enoch, it's an ancient Hebrew scripture that was cast aside from the canonical scripture during the councils of Nicaea and others convoked by Constantine. It was considered to be non-scriptural, so they pushed it aside into the apocryphal books. According to his book, there's a big section that speaks of the ghosts or the spirits of the Nephilim who died on the earth, who died as a result of the great flood of Noah, as mentioned in the Hebrew Bible, which, by the way, is another common thread to all of these stories, a great catastrophic flood connected to many of these accounts. And it's saying that the spirits of these beings, of the Nephilim, because they were born on the earth, it says, they shall remain on the earth. While it talks about the sons of God, the Elohim, being not of this earth, so they're not bound here, their offspring are, because they were born here, and that these would be the evil spirits that would plague mankind throughout time. That's according to the Book of Enoch. So I would say if you want to look at the biblical demonic, if you will, I think it could be defined by the characters of the spiritual side of the Nephilim, the spirits left over, if that's how we are to interpret those passages. That's just from that single source in the Hebrew Scriptures. So are they here today? Yes, because I believe there is still the interbreeding going on. I believe that there is still, and again, I cannot quantify this with rock-solid scientific fact. It's when you start to compare all the notes. It's like saying, I have the scientific methodology over here where I can bring something into the lab and have my hypothesis and test it and retest it and get my conclusions. But this doesn't fit into that. You can't bring this stuff into a laboratory. You can't test it with a clipboard. It's the stuff, though, that has a scientific methodology at play behind it all, because you have it repeated over and over and over again throughout history. Different versions of the same stories. You have different versions of the accounts of impregnations or of abductions or of these kinds of beings that are doing the same thing. Then you add in, if you will, that psychic or metaphysical, that spiritual side of things where people have experienced this, and it all starts going back to these ancient beings. I would say, yes, absolutely. We are still being visited by this all today. I know there are different interpretations of it. There are different versions of what's going on. There might even be different races that are involved, but something is still going on today, and it's obvious and it's evident by everything that's going on.
What do they want, Scott?
Somebody just asked me that question yesterday, and I had never written precisely about what they want. So I gave a very quick summary of what I believe it is. When you start looking at the ancient stories, it was not a story, it seemed, of integration, of wanting to help mankind, of wanting to be benevolent, be this benevolent alien race that came and visited us. It seems that there's a couple of different branches of this, if you will. There seems to be the race that wanted subjugation or enslavement of the human race. Then there seems to be the race or the breakaway race that wanted to freedom fight for the humans, that wanted to breed them up. Had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with Whitley, who suggested to me maybe there was even a breeding down, that loss of memory, that corporate encoding of something that has sealed off the truth to us. And we're just starting to come to the place where, after years and years and centuries of trying to uncover these things, we're starting to see it resurface. So what did they want? All depends on which angle you look at, but it sounds like there was that there was breeding, that there was seeding, that there was enslavement, that there was freedom from enslavement, and that those are these two races in particular that seem to be constantly warring with each other.
Scott, we have to take a quick break. When we come back, let's talk about the Paradigm Symposium and get into some more detailed conversation about your thoughts on the Nephilim. This is Revelations. We'll be right back.
Did you know that William Henry's going to Peru in October? Well, that's right. And it's going to be an extraordinary journey. He's led other spiritual journeys to power places in Egypt, of course, in France, in England, in Ireland, and Scotland in search of secret teachings about human transformation and the star doors and gateways to eternity. And this is going to be as extraordinary an experience for the people who come with William as all of the other tours have been. Don't miss this. It's time for Stargate Peru. Go to williamhenry.net to find out more.
You're listening to the Revelations of William Henry.
You think that what subscribers to UnknownCountry.com get is just an archive or a rehash of what you can hear for free? Not quite true. Listen to this.
The Indonesian doctor is writing an article in the 1980s. This is more than 10 years after the mysterious German doctor has died. And now he's writing his recollections of that whole episode. And one of his recollections was that there was a small boy at one time when he first met the doctor in the island of Sumbawa. There was a small American boy living with him.
And that small American boy turns out to have the same name as a serial killer in the United States who was obsessed with Hitler, who was the right age, and who was executed in 2010. Listen to this in the subscriber section. It is quite incredible, as is so much of the additional information that we offer. So come on and join us. Join the fun. Join the enlightenment. Get the information. Go to unknowncountry.com and subscribe. It's just $12.95 for 3 wonderful months.
This is Revelations. We're continuing with Scott Roberts. Scott is the editor of Intrepid Magazine. You can check it out at intrepidmag.com. Scott, you are hosting the Paradigm Symposium October 18th through the 21st in Minneapolis. What a wonderful town. I was there last year. I encourage everybody to go. Tell us about the event.
Well, the event is kind of a culmination of all these things, and it really kind of fell into our laps and became something out of just a lark of an idea. I had done all these events with the ghost hunters and in paranormal stuff over the years, and I said to my partner in this, Micah Hanks, I said, we ought to put on a symposium that deals with the ancient alien topic, this new paradigm. It seems that, like, ufology has shifted a bit more into understanding the ancient side of things. And as it interlinks or overlaps with archaeology and anthropology and cosmology and astronomy and all the other ologies in between. And so we came up with the Paradigm Symposium, and I just started putting out feelers and invites. I had been in an anthology book published by my publisher, New Page, the Lost Civilization series, and I wrote a chapter in that book. But Eric Von Daniken was in there, Marie D. Jones, Larry Flaxman, Laird Scranton, some of these other people that you're familiar with. And so I started putting out feelers, and I told them, here's who I am, here's what I'm doing. We're putting on this symposium. We'd like to know if you'd be interested in coming to speak. And everybody gave us an absolutely yes. And so the guest list that we have speaking, which could be 10 times as long as it is, because there's so many people we'd love to have in there, but we filled our docket so quickly. We've got Eric Von Daniken, who wrote Chariots of the Gods back in the late 60s, and has written many books since then. We've got George Norrie from Coast to Coast. We have from the History Channel's H2, their series Ancient Aliens. We have Philip Coppens, Giorgio Tsoukalis, Bill Burns. We have Ian Punnett, who did the Weekend Coast to Coast, moderating the panel discussion. Then we have 10 other authors from Laird Scranton, Marie D. Jones, Larry Flaxman, Nick Redfern, Dr. John Ward, archaeologist, anthropologist, friend of mine from Luxor, Egypt, speaking on symbology and the connections to the Cathars and the Templars and all of that.
Fantastic.
We've got probably people I'm missing on the list, John Ventry from MUFON, and several others. So it's taking place October 18th through the 21st, and we believe this is for us too. It's to learn something. It's to disseminate information. And so if your listeners are interested in this kind of thing, we're being told in these circles that this is the must-go-to event of the year. And so we hope that that's what it is. And people can just go to intrepidmag.com, click on the Paradigm Symposium link, or go directly to ParadigmSymposium.com.
Well, I wish you a lot of luck with that. I really enjoyed,
you.
as I said, visiting Minneapolis last year, wonderful Midwestern town. And
I'll tell you, third weekend in October in Minnesota is the prime fall color season, so it's a great time of year up here.
There you go. Very good. So, Scott, let's talk some more about the Nephilim. They are thought of as knowledge bearers as well. What do you think this knowledge was that the Nephilim brought?
Well, here's what you get in that story of the Nephilim. It's not so much biblically connected to them until you get into the book of Enoch. It talks how the sons of God, or the Bene Ha-Elohim, the Elohim, Enoch refers to them as the Watchers, how they came down and interbred with human women, but also brought with them forbidden knowledges of the gods, things that humans weren't supposed to know. Right. And it even enlists some of them, and it seems so odd that these were forbidden, but it was things like cosmology, herbology, the signs of the sun, moon, and stars, cosmetics, the making of mirrors and weapons and stuff like that. And so you've got all of that listed in the book of Enoch. But then you start going to comparative studies in different mythologies and religions, and it seems that all of these breakaway gods, if you will, these pantheons of gods, when they left and they taught the human beings the forbidden knowledges of the gods, this was always the thing that incited the wrath of the deities or the superior power. And in many of the cases, it was connected to the flood stories of ancient civilization. And it got me asking the question, what did God, if you will, have against knowledge? And then you start comparing it to these other stories, and you say, wait a minute, if it's not about God, if it's about ancient non-human intelligences, races that perhaps enslaved us at one point or were subjugating us at some point, and then somebody else came along, either break away from their race or a different race, and taught the knowledges that they didn't want the humans to know, this is what incited all of this condemnation, the being condemned to subterranean caverns, the being cast down to the earth, and all of these different stories. And so what you've got is forbidden knowledge that's been given to humans along with a breeding up process. And this forbidden knowledge seems to have created the conflict that's going on between at least these two major races that seem to exist. And, of course, whenever in contemporary times now you talk about alien races and you start defining, and there's these two alien races, people will gloss over with you, and they'll start thinking you're getting into that weird, wacky, fringe element of things. But the way I try to temper that is saying, look, this is what all these mythologies are teaching. And it's telling us that we were imbued with some kind of knowledge that created havoc here. And this is the result of what we see of all these different mythological tales.
And so, what do you think specifically that knowledge would be then? I mean, it goes well beyond cosmetics and some of the things listed in the book of Enoch. There must be something more profound that they jealously guard us.
I start with speculation at that point because I haven't found anything where I can hone in and say, here it is, without a shadow of a doubt, this is the knowledge that was imbued with us. Now, you can go to, again, metaphysics and psychic phenomena, spiritual phenomena. You can find out some of what the metaphysical speculation is on this. But it seems to me that there were knowledges that were to make us equal with them. Now, what that knowledge consists of, I don't know. I found the correlation to that in the Garden of Eden story. Because, by the way, I believe Cain and Abel, the twin sons of Adam and Eve, that Cain was the first of the Nephilim. He was fathered by the serpent character in the Bible, who we were always taught was Lucifer and Satan, but that appears nowhere in the text. It's thousands of years later.
Who do you think the serpent character actually was then?
It calls him Nakash in the book of Genesis. And Nakash means the crafty magician, the bringer of knowledge and illumination, the bright shining one. And I correlate that to Psalm 82, where God himself in the Old Testament, under the name of Elohim, is speaking to the cast of the Elohim, the divine council. He says, and God, Elohim, said to the Elohim, you are Elohim, the bright shining princes of heaven. And so this bright shining aspect, which you find also in Celtic lore with the Tuatha De Danann, the gods who came from the heavens, and many other of these stories through other legends and cultures, religions and cultures, you find it all correlates with this bright shining one in the Garden of Eden. And when this bright shining one, the whole context there in that account of Adam and Eve and the serpent is sexual in nature. And the one phrase that really stuck out to me, and I'd heard this my whole life, but it never made sense until I did these comparative studies, was when after they had eaten the forbidden fruit, quote unquote, whatever that fruit was, I believe it was the sexual encounters and the knowledge that was given, it says this, and God said, or Elohim said, the humans have eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Let us, plural, prevent them also from eating of the tree of life, lest they also become like us, like the Elohim. So it brought up two questions for me, just biblically speaking. What did God have against humans having knowledge? Mm-hmm. And two, what did it mean when God said humans could be just like him, or just like them, the Elohim, if they did this, eat of the tree of life, which is obviously encoded and allegorical. It had something to do, they've gained the knowledge, but there was something else they could do, which was not spelled out in the old scriptures, that could make them equal to the gods. And that raised great questions for me, because then again, it started overlapping with so many other religions and cultures.
Do you think we're talking about a race of light beings, spirit beings here that have the ability to materialize as flesh and blood beings and then dematerialize into light form again? Is that the trick we're talking about here?
I think you're definitely dealing with something that could be interdimensional. I think you're dealing with character, and again, that's too empirical a statement for me to make. I don't have proof of that. I think at least some of this you're dealing with interdimensional characters because they cannot be detected. They come into people's dreams. They come into people in the middle of the night and take them away and bring them back. And there's all these abilities they seem to have. You've got your subterranean dwellers. I was just speaking with Barry Fitzgerald from Ghost Hunters International, who wrote a book, In the Mists of Gods, where he's talking about the things that dwell beneath our feet. And he did all this cavern exploration all around the world and finding the voices that call out to you, the things that correlate to the old Celtic mythologies of the fairy folk and how they would dwell in the underground caverns and speak to you. You've got the Tuatha De Danann again, the bright shining gods from heaven who came down and intermingled with humans and taught forbidden knowledges, and after the wars they were driven into the hollow hills, the subterranean caverns, and became known as the Elven folk. And you've got all these mythologies that start to speak of all of this stuff. Again,
did Jesus duke it out with the Nephilim, do you think, or could they have been part of those righteous souls from the Old Testament times that he retrieved from the underworld?
You know, it does say in Christian theology that during those 3 days between death and resurrection, he descended into the bowels of the earth. Limbo. Into Hades, it says at one point, and that he communed with the saints who had gone on before. And, of course, this is all Christian lingo put on top of these stories, Christianized language. I've always wondered about Jesus himself, and I'm in the midst of trying to dig out information on this all right now while I'm writing the second book. So I'm right in the middle of it. But the idea or the notion that Jesus as the Son of God, he's called in the New Testament, has any correlation to the sons of God, the Bene HaElohim of the Old Testament, and this cast of divine counsel. And that if Jesus himself, if he were indeed, quote-unquote, divinity as the New Testament puts it, perhaps he is one of these Elohim, one of these beings.
Well, as Moses lifted the serpent of healing in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted. So it seems to be indicating right there he's of this race.
And what's very interesting is that serpent that he lifted in the wilderness is the same base word as Nakash, the serpent in the garden.
Exactly. So we must be uplifting the Nephilim bright shining one.
Yes, and that's exactly what you've got going on, and there is so much reference to that. There are even references that a few years ago, this would have been utter blasphemy or heresy to me. I would not even have let it pass my lips. But the idea that Jesus and Lucifer were brothers of sorts and of the same race. And now I only bring that up now because it seems to me like it starts to make sense with the Elohim in the Old Testament.
So why is that so off limits among, say, some of the stricter, more fundamentalist, closed-minded, if you will, denominations? What's the matter with those people?
Well, now, I came out of very conservative, fundamentalist Baptist settings, and that's where all my education was. That is the same group that when I brought up the notion This was years before the Da Vinci Code was out, but I brought up the notion that maybe Jesus was married and that his first public miracle was at the wedding of Cana, where he turns the water to wine. It fills in so many gaps of traditional Jewish rabbinic tradition, that they had to be married, that the groom's family had to provide wine, and that all of this and all the stories around that. And I was told immediately, that is sacrilegious. That is blasphemy. The divine Savior of the universe could not have been married. And my simple question was, why not?
Right.
Why would that have changed who he was? Doesn't the Bible tell us that he experienced life in all points as we were? And so this question about who he was, it's taboo because you're starting to deal with, especially in the fundamental conservative mindset, it's a closed door. This is our theology. There is no more to this. And when I was in that camp of thinking, the world and the universe were very small places. It was very easy to wrangle. God was in command of it all, and Jesus the Savior, and so on. And once I stepped outside of that and found that there's a much bigger universe there, the universe became a very large place to get lost in.
Well, we're really glad you made it out of that box, Scott. I know there's lots of other people out there that are experiencing real pain and real challenges in their life because they just can't open that door. And so that's why we're here, isn't it, ultimately, my friend?
It is.
Try to open that door for people.
And you know, you're going to have that. I'm going to deal with this the rest of my life. The psychology of it, the thinking, every so often, still the old teachings, you're going to burn in hell for this. And those things will never go away. It's because they're ingrained in our minds. But it's having to say, I need to step away from that and say, I need to look at what is as opposed to dogma and theology that were placed on top of what is. And because once you start putting religious dogma to something, you start closing down the doors. You start battening down the hatches. And there's no room for speculation. There's no room for a bigger universe out there. So the psychology of it, you're going to deal with it the rest of your life. And especially if you came out of something like Catholicism, Christianity, Judaism, these things will stay with you.
Absolutely.
Even though
and
for the
most part, it's a very solid foundation for people, too. So I want to make sure that we put that on the table, that it's a great stepping stone, a wonderful stepping stone, but we're always encouraged to learn more.
And it's not to say that stuff doesn't exist in some form. It's not to say throw it away. It's a trash can. I'm not saying that at all, and I don't want to dissuade anyone from their spirituality or their faith. But it's saying, look, there's more to God than you might think there is. And it might be something very different than what you've been taught.
Agreed. Scott, we've run out of time for today. Could talk with you all afternoon, and we'll certainly look forward to catching up with you when the new book comes out. When will that be available, by the way?
Its manuscript is due in about 6 weeks, and it should be out February of 2013 is the target date.
Well, we'd love to have you back to talk about it then. Until then, The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim is available from New Pages Books. Hop over to Amazon.com or IntrepidMag.com. And once again, best of luck with the Paradigm Symposium and with all our good friends, George Nuri, Nick Redfern, Laird Scranton, a whole bunch of others. And thank you so much for joining us today, Scott.
William, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. This has been Revelations. We'll see you next time.
Attending